On a winter's night, 10th century, in the frozen blackness of Kiev winter, 5,000 men's screams echoed across the white steppes of ancient Kiev. They died in their blood-stained fields, staining the landscape with red. But not at the hands of a warlord or a conqueror. She was a widow, a princess immersed in grief and driven by revenge. Her name was Princess Olga of Kiev, and hers is a story you've never heard. This is not merely a story of individual loss. It's one of redemption, a story of change, from a mourning widow to a ruthless planner of genocide. A woman who etched her way to power through blaze and rage, destroying entire villages in the process. And that's the irony that will forever gnaw at you. This same woman, dripping with blood and infamous for one of history's most premeditated vengeance drives, would eventually be declared a saint. How did a woman who was guilty of mass murder end up blessed in prayers? How did a person who plotted wholesale massacres end up immortalized in holy icons and golden mosaics? Reality is buried beneath 1,000 years of retouched scripture, political convenience, and the appalling fact that most of history's saints wore the mask of a sinner. Tonight we raise the curtain of holiness and gaze directly into the depths of revenge, where faith is forged in flames and saintliness is bathed in blood. Imagine it, a world where loyalty was weighed in severed heads, strength in rivers of blood you flowed. That was the harsh world of 10th century Eastern Europe, a chessboard of chaos ruled over by Slavic warlords, Viking fighters, and emergent kingdoms, all held together in a perpetual struggle for control. It was into this violent stew of ambition and brutality that Olga was born, perhaps sometime around 890 CE, deep in the distant northeastern parts of what we now consider Russia. Then came Kievan Rus, the loose confederation of tribes which Olga later ruled, not a nation so much as a precarious system of walled commercial towns. The towns ran along the great rivers uniting the frigid terminus of Scandinavia to Byzantium's gold and luxury. The self-styled leaders, descendants of the legendary Viking warlord Rurik, maintained their precarious grip on power through an unstable blend of fear, tribute, and astute wedlock. Olga likely came from a frontier town named Pskov, a crude crossroads where Norse traders sold slaves and pelts for Byzantine silks and silver. Her marriage to Kiev's Prince Igor was no romantic fairy tale. She was an arranged marriage designed to unite through lineage. But in a world where women were chiefly regarded as nothing more than tokens for bargaining, the course they followed was rare. Olga and Igor's union was not just political. It was one of mutual respect and ambition, too. They were a ruling force, a twosome in a ruthless era. Step forward the Drevlians, a quick-tempered, proud Slavic people who possessed the dense forests west of Kiev. They were named after the Slavic word for tree, and their forest was both fortress and identity. The Drevlians resented Kiev's mastership. They paid their tributes grudgingly, always on the lookout for a moment of weakness, ever prepared to strike back. That was in the year 945 CE, when Prince Igor made a fatally incorrect decision. Having collected the tribute for the year from the Drevlians, Igor did the unthinkable. He returned demanding more, a second helping. It was a stupid disregard of honor and tradition, and the Drevlians interpreted it as an unforgivable offense. What followed was not just rebellion. It was staged cruelty followed by death. It was the matches that ignited one of history's most gruesome revenge tales. Igor, with little more than a token guard, was captured south of the town of Iskorostan by Drevlian warriors under their prince Mal. What they did to him was worse than killing, worse than murder. It was a show intended to make statement. A letter full of suffering, tears, and rebellion. But they had no idea what they had just stirred. For the woman who was waiting in Kiev, Princess Olga would not cry in silence. Her grief would be transformed into the rage of an empire. And this was only the beginning. What ensued was an atrocity documented in graphic detail by eyewitnesses, a moment so evil, it still echoes through the ages. The Drevlians, in a horrific display of symbolic violence, bent 2 young birch saplings to the ground, bound one of Prince Igor's legs to each of them, and then released them. The trees snapped back, tearing the prince in two with a revolting crack. His shrieks, gut-tearing, interminable, tore through the still forest as guts and blood snowed down on the white earth. This was not stupid savagery. It was a statement, loud, clear, and brutal. The Drevlians were not simply killing a ruler. They were proclaiming their uprising. By employing the living trees of their woods as weapons of death, they were proclaiming their individuality, their connection to the land, and their total rejection of Kievan rule. It was an act of uprising, a gesture they wished would frighten Kiev into submission. But what they didn't calculate was who they had just angered. In Kiev, word of Igor's ghastly death came to Princess Olga. But she did not respond as was traditional, wailing, tearing her clothes, public demonstrations of sorrow. Instead, she met the news with frosty silence. No tears, no fury, no wrath, but cold, quiet remoteness. Her court noticed. The woman who emerged from her chambers was no longer the grieving widow. She was a statue of vengeance weathered in stone. And then the Drevlians made their second catastrophic mistake. Drunk on victory, they dispatched ambassadors to Olga with a haughty suggestion that she marry their prince, Mal, uniting the two states under Drevlian rule. They believed they were presenting her with security and stability. What they were actually presenting was their own obituary. A party of 20 Drevli nobles arrived in Kiev dressed in their finest and dripping self-importance. Olga entertained them with apparent hospitality and respect. She invited them aboard their boat to stay there, promising to prepare a formal reception. During the night, while they slept, her servants dug a deep pit in the courtyard. The next morning, still thinking themselves honored guests, the Drevlians were hoisted, boat and all, into the courtyard and tipped into the pit. Perplexed and terror-stricken, they looked up to find Olga standing at the edge of the pit. With icy voice and wicked smile, she inquired, "Is this honor to your liking?" Then her men began to cover over with dirt. Shrills rent the air as the ambassadors were buried alive, gagging, clawing, suffocated under the weight of the earth. Their muffled cries would haunt Kiev for hours. But Olga was not yet done. She sent yet another message to the Drevlians, pretending to consider their offer. She requested their best nobles to bring her back themselves, as was the custom for a royal bride. The Drevlians, unaware, compliantly did so, sending their most senior representatives to Kiev. Upon their return, Olga welcomed them both kindly and with dignity. She even requested if she could make use of her own bathhouse to relax after their long journey. They gratefully accepted, stepping into the steam and heat with guffaws. The doors were shut behind them. The building was set ablaze. The chronicles record the demonic display, laughter yielding to alarm, alarm to terror, and terror to screams of blood-freezing horror. They pounded on the doors, skin seared and blistered, until silence reigned again, and left behind only the stench of charred corpses. Even so, still, Olga was not satisfied. She sent them a message again, to tell them that she herself would go to Drevlian land to conduct the funeral rites for her husband. It was a sacred tradition, one sworn enemies were bound to preserve. She requested that they prepare a grand feast in honor of Prince Igor. The Drevlians, either deceived by her previous actions or thinking that the slaughter was at an end, complied. And when Olga arrived at Iskorostan, the Drevlian capital, she played her part well. In mourning clothes, she wept beside her husband's grave. She tore her hair and shrieked in public grief. The Drevlians, melted by her apparent loss, thought she had finally embraced their peace. That night the feast was served. Mead ran, and there was laughter in the hall, while Olga's secret warriors encircled the city. The Drevlians, drunk, distracted, and unaware, celebrated what they believed was their final triumph. That was when Olga sent the word. Her warriors descended on celebrants like shades with swords. Sword and axe cleaved the crowd. Floors ran red with blood. Screams tore the darkness. By morning, 5,000 Drevlians lay dead, although some accounts allow that possibly the number was exaggerated. But of the message, there could be no doubt. The very heart of Drevlian nobility had been ripped out in a single barbaric night. And yet, this too was not done. The survivors fled to Iskarostan walls, hoping to ride out what they now realized was an unstoppable flood. Olga did not tarry long, neither as diplomat, nor as widow, returned as general. She came back with army. She came back with war. The city held for 12 months, its defenders now old men, women, and children. Most of its warriors had perished at the feast. Alya tried to storm the city, but the wooden walls and desperate courage of the townspeople remained strong. She turned again to trickery. What she did next would be her most cunning, most evil play thus far, one that would enshrine her in the record books as an evil strategist, and one day, the world's most improbable saint. In a final attempt at dishonesty cased in diplomatic speak, Olga approached the desperate citizens of Iskarostan with an odd proposal. She proclaimed she was weary of the siege and would settle for an idle tribute. All that she required, she said, was 3 sparrows and 3 pigeons from each home, a request so infinitesimal, so bizarre, that the Drevlians could hardly credit their good luck. Hurrying to be rid of her wrath, they complied. The birds were rounded up hastily, unaware that they were to be used to wreak havoc. Late in the evening, when darkness had fallen, Olga's soldiers strapped tiny packets of sulfur wrapped in cloth onto the legs of the birds. Let loose, the birds did what birds naturally would do. They flew back to their homes. Home, to their nests in the thatched hovels and wooden eaves of Iskarostan. Within minutes, the city was a firestorm. Fire jumped from roof to roof, fueled by parched wood and the prudently seated incendiaries. Before anyone could act, the entire city was in flames. Families fled in panic. Some tried to flee, only to be gunned down by Olga's soldiers crouching just beyond the city walls. Others perished in their homes, suffocated by smoke and fire. The screams of the children burning alive rang in the night, and parents were forced to make a horrible decision: enter the flames or perish by the sword. Iskarostan was nothing but smoldering ruins by dawn. Its people were killed or led away into slavery. Its heritage destroyed. The Drevlians were not a tribe any longer. They lived only in memory. Olga had done more than quell a rebellion. She had committed a complete cultural genocide, killing warriors, leaders, and civilians in a similar fashion. The land was divided among her loyalists, the survivors sold into slavery, and any other towns brought to heel under oppressive tribute. Where there had been a proud forest folk, now there was only ash and silence. But history, as is so often its habit, dished up a staggering turnabout. In a decade, the woman whose last name was soon to become synonymous with vengeance undertook a transformation so radical it still defies the imagination. In 955 or 957 CE, accounts differ. Olga journeyed to Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire's glittering jewel. In the great dome of Hagia Sophia, surrounded by gold mosaics and imperial splendor, she was baptized into Christianity. She took the name Helena. Why did she do it? Historians have different hypotheses. Some believe she was captivated by the beauty and radiance of Eastern Christianity, seduced by its promise of divine order and boundless salvation. Others have posited that her baptism was a political maneuver, a way of positioning Kievan Rus within the most powerful Christian superpower of the time. And others who think there was a deeper, more personal change, that the Olga conscience had finally been roused, that the weight of her crimes drove her to seek forgiveness in a faith that guarantees it, even to the hardest of hearts. Whatever her motive, Olga became a Christian with the same fervor she had applied to killing her enemies. She built churches, supported missionaries, and ruled as regent of Kiev with a sagacity that surprised even her foes. She established legal reforms, unified commerce, and tried, and failed, to convert her son Sviatoslav, who held fast to his pagan roots until his death. The woman who set cities on fire with birds now lit candles in front of icons. The blood-stained hands now rose in prayer. When she died sometime around 969 CE, she was not remembered as a tyrant, but as a fair ruler and a faithful Christian. Her grandson, Vladimir the Great, would later finish what she had begun, Christianizing the whole Kievan Rus in 988 CE. And with this new religious heritage came a new narrative, one that would forever redefine Olga's legacy. Christian historians, anxious to sanctify the beginnings of their religion, went about rewriting her legend. Her massacres were reinterpreted as acts of divine vengeance. Her deceptions were reimagined as cunning strategy. The woman who buried men alive in pits and set cities ablaze was now a sacred warrior, casting a beam of light in an unlighted world. By the 13th century, Olga had been canonized officially by the Eastern Orthodox Church. She was bestowed with the honor of equal to the apostles, a designation reserved only for those whose activities were seen as being crucial in spreading Christianity, equal to the disciples of Christ himself. In icons, she stands serene-eyed, cross in one hand, model church in the other. The flames of vengeance, the cries of the wounded, the seas of blood, all washed away by religious necessity and the gentle hush of time. Saint Olga of Kiev is celebrated today all over Eastern Europe. She is invoked in prayer. Her image adorns, but beneath the gold leaf and incense is a reality so much more complex, a reality that shakes us. The path to sainthood is not always paved with mercy. Sometimes it's soaked in blood. Churches across Eastern Europe, from Moscow to Kiev to Belgrade, are now named after Saint Olga. Her feast day, July 11th, is observance with somber prayer and holy procession. Candles are lit before her icons as the faithful ask her to intervene on matters of faith, government, and guidance. In Ukraine, she is not merely a saint but a national heroine, a symbol of strength, leadership, and independence. She stands in bronze statues in city squares, sculpted in regal splendor. She holds a cross, her eyes noble and serene, with not a trace of the widow, shamed by hatred who in her time buried men alive and laid cities waste. But this conversion, this sanctification, confronts us with a series of uneasy truths. How do we reconcile the Olga who planned mass murder with the Olga who constructed churches and preached peace? How does a woman guilty of cultural genocide become a saint? The Orthodox Church has a simple theological explanation. Olga was reborn in baptism. Her sins, no matter how ghastly, were washed away in the waters of conversion. Her violent past is no taint of shame, but a testament to the miracle of divine metamorphosis, proof that even the sourest, blackened soul can be cleansed by faith. But this version, as spiritually convenient, also covers a more profound and more sinister fact. Olga's canonization was not only a religious act, a political one as well. In the earliest Christian world, royal saints were instruments of calculated utility. They blessed political power. A converted pagan princess who brought her nation into the Christian world was an irreproachable symbol, too valuable to be tarnished by the blood she had spilled. Her sanctity did not remove history, it realigned it. And that very rewriting is an instance of a larger, cyclical process throughout human civilization, nation selective memory. Every people, every culture needs its heroes, sacred ancestors. But building these icons typically involves burying the unwanted facts. Olga the mass killer is quietly forgotten. Olga the religious saint is commemorated, taught to children, enshrined in glass and stone. And the Drevlians, those who died in fire, sword, and deception, become in memory only faceless rebels, villains in their executioner's tale of redemption. They did not leave a written account of their own. Theirs is a history that survives only in the conqueror's tale by the woman who ruined them. In modern Ukraine, Olga's figure is charged with significant symbolism. As the nation struggles to establish itself independent of Russia, Olga is once again welcomed as a specifically Ukrainian icon, a strong female leader who united and civilized her people. Her likeness graces stamps, currency, textbooks, But the burning of Iskarostan, the ambassadors trapped alive in the ground, the massacre at the bathhouse, those items, if mentioned at all, are afterthoughts. She is now what the country needs her to be, a symbol of strength and not a reminder of horror. And yet perhaps something might be gained by confronting the absolute truth about Olga's legacy. Her story, in all its splendor and violence, tells us something about humanity. She was a woman in a brutal, man's world who would not be beaten. She turned grief into power, employed revenge with accuracy, and reduced an empire to its knees. She was also a woman who was merciless, who wreaked havoc on the innocent, and who invented cruel methods of execution which are still horrifying after 1,000 years. This is the paradox of Saint Olga. She forces us to wrestle with the limits of forgiveness, the possibility of redemption, and the lies to which we will submit ourselves about the past. Can a mass murderer be a saint? Does one baptism wash away an eternity of blood? Or does conversion simply give us permission to stop asking hard questions? If we do believe in redemption, do we have to assume that even history's monsters can pass away with halos on their heads? And if we rule out that possibility, what does that say about our belief in humanly caused change? Olga's story is not just the story of one woman changed by revenge to devotion. It's a mirror held up to all societies that have elevated their murderers to kings, their mass killings to miracles, their violence to virtue. It's a lesson about how memory is shaped, how history is manufactured, and how truth is buried, sometimes beneath monuments, sometimes beneath myth. So the next time you stand before the shimmering icon of Saint Olga, eyes at peace, cross in hand, remember the screams beneath the ground, the flames over Iskarostan, the nobles scratching at the entrance of the bathhouse. And ask yourself, whom do we choose to sanctify and why? We do not return to Olga's tale to preclude the eventuality of redemption, but to acknowledge that true remembrance involves doubleness, to welcome both truths at once, the saint and the sinner, the holy woman and the mass killer, the light of belief and the darkness sometimes thrown by it. Those birds that incinerated Iskarostan have long faded into ash, but in flight they still leave a blazing path through history, a path that would shape the destiny of Eastern Europe. From the devastation of that city, there would be born a Christian kingdom. From the Drevlians' blood, there would be christened a nation. This is the historian's paradox. Our cultures are often built on bones, and the hands that shape our holiest symbols are often red-stained. Some of our saints, well, the most bloody of them all, and perhaps that is the actual legacy of Olga. Not only the churches she constructed, not just the faith she embraced, but the questions her existence leaves us to pose. In a world where terror is so commonly masked as virtue, where tomorrow's statesman is today's terrorist, and genocide is rebranded as nation-building, Olga is a reflection, and we see in her the contradictions we all endure. Her canonization wasn't an act of piety, it was a political maneuver, a choice made not in heaven, but in council chambers, where image was more important than truth. Holiness was used as a mechanism of power, and history became a survivor's account. Sanctity, as the life of Olga demonstrates, is frequently granted to the most useful rather than to the most virtuous. As evening comes to another July 11th somewhere in Eastern Europe, a believer prays before her icon. They light a candle. They say a prayer for strength, for guidance, for peace. They do not think of the fires of Iskarostan, or the ambassadors who are dead, or the screams in the bathhouse. They only see the saint. And perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps that's the only way we make it through our history, selective memory, willful forgetting, by choosing which truths to call forth and which to seal in the ashes. But for those who will look deeper, who will hold the whole of the tale, the light and the darkness, in their hearts without wincing, Olga offers a different kind of wisdom. She also discovers that human beings are not only capable of unimaginable cruelty, but also of incredible transformation. That the same hands that sign death warrants can fold in prayer, humble and genuine. that history's greatest sinners and greatest saints are quite often the very same soul, viewed from two directions. She forces us to ask, is there any sin so terrible that it cannot be forgiven? Or does time, faith, and necessity turn atrocity into legacy? In the end, we're left with a choice. We can accept the comfortable myth, Saint Olga, the wise and pious ruler whose violent past was simply a prelude to her divine destiny. Or we can face the painful truth, Princess Olga, the brutal widow who brought hellfire down upon a people and proceeded to become sanctified as a saint. The decision we make says more about us than it does about her, about our capacity to forgive, about our need for heroes, and about our readiness or refusal to confront the darker elements of our own history. The flames that consumed Iskarostan are distant cold, but the questions they raised remain smoldering. In every icon of Saint Olga, in every monument to her greatness, in every child instructed with only half a legend, she stands not just a picture of the past, but a condemnation of the present. She is more than a saint. She is more than a monster. She is both. And that makes her more than a figure of history, makes her horrifically human. So let us remember her not only in hymns, but in the conflict between what we adore and what we hide. Let us see her not only in gold and light, but in shadow and flame. Because ultimately, Olga of Kiev is the greatest paradox. A woman who burned a kingdom and built a church on its ashes. A mass murderer who became a saint. A symbol of redemption and a warning of the cost. May her story haunt us, as it should. A warning, a mirror, a reminder that the line between saint and sinner is thinner than we'd like to admit, and that within each of us lies the potential to be either or both.